What is your name?
Glen Jr.
Where were you born and what year?
I was born in Dorton, Kentucky in 1941.
Did you have any siblings?
I had three, two brothers and one sister. A brother and one sister. My sister was 8 years older than I was, and my oldest brother was 10 years older, and my younger brother was 2 years younger.
What were your parents' name?
Glen Price and Bessie Price.
What did they do for a living?
My mother was a homemaker, and my father was a jack of all trades. He mostly did coal mining and mechanicking, and he built some houses and just general labor in Kentucky. He liked to travel. He never liked to stay in one place any amount of time. We moved from one house to another about 3-4 times while I was growing up. My first memories of childhood was in North Carolina, a little place called Smoky Creek. There was an old mill pond where there used to be an old-timey grist mill. It was a dirt road with a hill, and the first toy I remember having was a wagon, and that was in 1946, because when I was growing up, World War II was in progress, and there was hardly any toys for children to play with, and my mother said that was one of the first toys that came into a store in Lenore, and she bought us a wagon. And my two older siblings and my younger one would all get in this wagon and ride down the hills. We'd take turns, ride down the hill and splash into the old mill pond. It wasn't all that deep, but it was fun to ride down that dirt road and hit that water. Then, when I was 6 years old, we moved from there back to Kentucky. Like I said, my dad never stayed in one place too long. And my mother said in all the time that they was married, they lived in 32 different houses, anywhere all the way from Missouri to North Carolina, Kentucky, and a couple of places I don't know where. Then I started school in Kentucky, and it was in the mountains. 2-room schoolhouse, and they taught all 6 grades in it with 3 teachers. Up to the 6th grade, had 6 grades in it. We had go to a spring and carry water to school, and we put some pills in it, and every person had their own drinking cup, and they would dip it in a dipper and pour water in your cup and drink it. That's the way you got water. We had an old outdoor toilet, and that was a wood building over a hole in the ground that we used for bathrooms. We had an old pot-bellied stove that sat in the center of the room, and you put coal in it in the morning and get the fire started before the teacher and the children got there. We had certain people that lived close to school, and they'd pay them a certain amount to start the fires of the morning, so the schoolhouse would be warm time we got there. And when it was really cold, we rotated seats so you wouldn't, because it's in the center of the room and up close to it, you get real hot, and on the one next to the wall would get cold, so they rotated seats about every 15 or 20 minutes. You get up and move from one seat to another, closer to the fire or further away from the fire. That was until we was in the 6th grade. Then when we got that, we were transferred to a more modern school, and we was bussed into those. The first school we had to walk to school because everybody didn't have cars like they do now. My mother didn't drive, and my dad was working, so we walked to school a mile each way. My younger brother and I, the older ones, is already into the other school. Then when we got 6th grade, we was transferred to Dorton High School, and middle school and high school. And there's where I finished up my last years of school. Then I went to Pottville College and had 2 years finished, and there was people there interviewing to see if they could find somebody to teach school up in a unique location. It was a little hollow, as they called it, beside of a river, and the only way you could get in was to walk through a railroad tunnel to these probably 16 families. They were cut off except walking through that tunnel to in and out. The ones that had vehicles parked them at the end of that tunnel beside of the road, and then walk out and move about. And they interviewed people to see if anybody would take that job. So I needed money and was in debt for going to school, so I thought I'd give it a try. And they give us a temporary emergency teaching certificate to go in up in there and teach school. I had 8 students. I had 2 in the first, 1 in the fourth, 3 in the 7th, and 1 or 2 in the 8th. And you had to teach all the subjects in one day. And I gave that a try. Tried it for 2 years. Taught 2 years at it. Then I told them I didn't want to do that anymore. Right at the end of the 2nd year, my girlfriend and I eloped and got married. And that was the end of my education career.
How did you meet her?
My first cousin said during this time my father and mother had moved back to North Carolina, so I stayed with my grandma. And at that time, people did not draw Social Security because it hadn't come in, so she drew no money at all. She had to make do with what she could get from her family. So I moved in with my grandma and buy the food and pay the bills and stayed with her for a couple of years while I was teaching at school. And my first cousin got killed, and they had his funeral, and they brought in 3 sisters to sing at his funeral, and they needed a way back to their home, which is about 10 or 12 miles from where the funeral was at. So my first cousin and I took those 3 girls home, and he said, let's stop up at Wright's Restaurant. There's a little place up. So we stopped there, and he said, I want you to meet somebody. And that's the first time I saw her, was he introduced her. And we got in the car, and he said, I see her every day when we go by. He took automotive training for his school, but they had to be bused away to a technical school and then back home with the evening, half a day at high school and then a half a day at technical school. And they bust them in and they bust them back. And he said, I see her every day and I wave at her, she waves back. She's so pretty at it. She's the prettiest thing I've ever seen. And I said, yeah, she's pretty, all right. And that, about 2 weeks after that, he said, my car's still tore up. Could you take me down there? And I said, okay. So we went down to her house. And we didn't say much. He talked to her a little bit. And they didn't really date, as you would call it. They just talked. And not a real long conversation. And because he was sort of bashful. He said, well, we got to go. So the next time I went down, I left him at home. And I went down and asked her for a date. And she accepted. So we dated off and on, 6 months, something like that. And we decided at the end of the 2nd year when I was teaching school to get married. So we eloped to Virginia. And it was quite comical when you think back about it, because we took my first cousin and one of her friends and her boyfriend went with us. And we got over there, and we had to have somebody to sign for her, because they couldn't get married because she wasn't old enough to get married in Virginia, so they had to get somebody to sign and give permission for her to get married. So I got in a car, went back to Kentucky, and got my aunt, because nobody knew where we was at, and got my aunt, and she went to Virginia to sign the papers for her to get married, give her consent. But she was so nervous that she couldn't sign it, so my other aunt had to sign the paper. And we got married at my aunt's house and in Virginia, Church of God minister. And after that, she went back and finished up school. Then went to my uncle called from Detroit and said that they were hiring in Great Lakes Steel in Michigan, that I could probably get a job there in the office. And so I went to Michigan to get that job in the office. I took a test, made real high on the test, real high score on the test, and they said, well, we'll be getting in touch with you in the next day or two. Well, the next day or two, instead of hiring, Great Lakes Steel started laying off people. So that, and I never did hear from that job. So there was another company up there, Wyandotte Chemical Company, and they had ads in there wanting people with education to take a test for chemical analysis. So I went down to Wyandotte Chemical. They gave us a test. There was about 20 or 30 people taking the test. Some of them had master's degree. Some had 4-year college degrees. I only had 2 years, but we took a test, and the interviewer told me, he said, you made the highest on that test of anybody in the room, and you'll be the first one we call. So I went back to my sister's house where I was staying in and sat down by the phone and waited for them to call, and they've not called yet. They never did call, so I don't know what happened to that job. So from there we went to Illinois, Chicago, and I applied for a job there, and they saw I had some college, so they gave me a test and wanted to put me in the chemical analysis there, the chemicals that they made, and you had to run an analysis on them every 30 minutes and make sure they're still like you're supposed to be. And so they had a listing there of what price they paid for that, and I was looking on the wall, and they had mechanical jobs up, and then they had one for a crane operator. Well, the crane operator job paid almost $1 an hour more than the one starting salary did for the lab. But the lab had an open end. You could keep getting raise after raise if you were good enough. But the crane started more, so I needed the money, so I took the job doing the crane operator. And we'd done that for a while, and then had one of those real rough Chicago winters. And my wife got homesick. She really didn't like northern people, was pretty hateful to her. Some of the neighbors in the apartments and things complained a lot because we had a little baby, and she cried a lot, and they'd think you could make her not cry when we was doing everything we could. But during that time, while I was up there working, my wife was going to have a child, so she went back and stayed with her mommy last little time before the baby was born, and to be there so they could take her to the hospital. And then I got a telegram, because didn't have phones in those apartment buildings back then. I hardly had any phones. And I got a telegram from her dad. It said took her to the hospital at 12 o'clock, I believe. And baby should arrive any time. So I cut off from work at 11 o'clock, so I just got into my car and headed to Kentucky. Well, during that time, it was bad in Kentucky. They was having floods. And I came to the Ohio River, where you cross from Ohio into Kentucky, and the water was up. The bridge was, you couldn't even see the bridge. It was underwater. So I didn't know what to do. I turned around, went to a service station, asked the man what to do, and he said, well, go down to Portsmouth, Ohio. He said, there's an old bridge there. It's much higher than the rest of them. It's the oldest bridge around, and he said, go there, and he said, if there's any way of getting across, that bridge should be open. So I went down, finally found where he was talking about, the road that led to that bridge. Asked a couple more people along the way, and I got to the bridge, and it was open, but the water was broadsiding it, and it was shaking. As you went across the bridge, you could feel the bridge is swaying. But I got across the bridge and went on to Kentucky side and got to the hospital in Pikeville, Kentucky, and she gave birth to her first child, a daughter. And when I got into the room, I sat down and vomited. I'd worked all day and drove all night, and it was up in the next day. And when that hospital cleaner fluid that they used, when it hit me, it just made me sick, and I vomited. Then that was her first child. Well, I went back to Chicago, back to work. She stayed home, and I came home in later to get her and the baby, and we put her in a banana box and set her behind the seats, a banana crate, and took her back to Chicago in a banana crate box. And we stayed in Chicago right till that winter, and it snowed. Let's see, she got homesick, and I told her just go on, catch the bus and go on back home, visit a little while, because she was homesick and wanted to go. And while she was gone, it snowed and snowed and snowed. It was one of those real bad Chicago winters, cold, below zero, cold. And she went to the bus station. I didn't know how to get down to the bus station, so I took her out to the street and called a cab. To a payphone, called a cab, and they come, picked her up, took her to the bus station. Because I wasn't really familiar with that part of Chicago, and when you're not familiar with the town, it's hard to find certain places, so it's easier to just call a cab and take her down there. Then after that, in the spring, she came back. Snow was still piled up. I think it was May when we left up there, and snow was still piled up 6 foot deep beside of the roads. We made it back. During that time, my father and mother moved to North Carolina, so we came here to see if I could find something to work at. I interviewed for several positions, and some of them would offer, they might give you a job and they might not. You had to wait and see. When a position come open, they'd call me. But during the time, I had to have something to live on, so I found a job at a furniture plant. Then started working in it till something come open, better, but nothing better came up except other furniture jobs. So I moved from one place to another and just kept moving up in the furniture factories. And some of the places, my education helped me some it didn't help me at all. Then I had several different positions up and down in furniture factories, and that was a fact of life back then. If you couldn't get money in one, what you wanted, you'd have to go to another one, because there's competition for labor in them. And I worked back and forth in that. Then my wife was working in the Dairy Freeze restaurant in Hudson, and the man decided he was going to get out and wanted to sell it. So we bought that and started working. I worked part-time at the restaurant and worked a regular job. Then we did that for about 8 years. It's very confining. You had to be there all the time, and you get burnt out on it. So after 8 years, we sort of burnt out from going in and out every day, and you could never get away from it because you had the responsibility of, even while you was gone, you didn't know what was going on, so you had to have some pretty reliable people there. But after 8 years, a man came in and offered to buy us out, so we just sold it. And then the supervisor from Kincaid Furniture called me. I put in an application, and he called me, and he even came to my house one day, and the personnel man did, and said, "Supervisor wanted me to come over and find you and bring you back to Kincaid's. He wants to talk to you." So I went to there, and they gave me a position at Kincaid Furniture, and that's where I finished up at till I retired. But along the way, my wife and I have been married all those years. Got married in 1963, and we're still going. We've got 2 more children after the first one, and 2 boys. And we've raised all 3 of them and got them grown, and now we've got 10 grandchildren. Love every one of them. Some more than others, though.
Well,
That's the way it is.